Good afternoon, team. Chief Walker here, coming to you from my office here at Langley Air Force Base. I hope this video finds you all doing well. The last time you saw me on video, I was with the boss and we were talking about resiliency. And we did a video for the Resilience Tactical Pause, which was overwhelmingly a great success. One bit of feedback we took out of that, though, and something we're very aware of, is that we can't just talk about resiliency once a year. We've got to make resiliency a topic that we continue to talk about and keep on the forefront of your mind and everyone else's mind in the wing. And so that's really why we're here today. I think there's no better way to talk about resiliency than to see resilience skills in action. And that's why we're here. I want to introduce you to a new friend of mine, Staff Sergeant Ben Murphree. Welcome, Ben.
Thanks, Chief.
Ben is here today. He's got a great story, and he's shown a lot of courage in wanting to share with us how he has used some resiliency skills in his life. Tell me about your worst day.
So hands down, my worst day, day that was at my lowest in regards to my mental health goes, was actually in tech school. For a few months, I had been dealing with depression, suicidal ideations, and stuff like that. And there was one morning walking on my way to school where I almost followed through and actually stepped out, attempted to step out in front of a semi-truck on base. And as you and I have kind of talked about, I'm not much of a believer or nothing, but my shoelaces were actually untied. I was standing on my shoelaces. It kept me from walking out in front of the truck. And so, yeah, it was just a really, really low day that day.
Yeah, and so at that point, man, you were committed to seeing this thing through, and we kind of laugh now with the shoelaces stopped you.
Yeah. And
you kind of said to yourself, I've got to, the realization that you needed some help, right? So can you talk to me a little bit about, into the wing, about what that looked like for you and how you came to seek out somebody to talk to?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually that morning that I attempted, I was on my way back into class after being out for about a month and a half. And I was on my way to go in and actually retake a test that I had failed.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had sat down to take the test, and they always go through the whole process of asking and making sure that everything's okay and you're actually good to go for taking the test and everything like that. And I sat there and kind of came to the realization what had actually happened that morning, and pulled the instructor out in the hallway and just flat out told him, I was like, listen, I just tried to kill myself.
Yeah.
And took me back into the back office and talked to some of the leadership there, and ended up pulling myself out of training for a couple months, and went to mental health that day. Saw mental health probably about 2-3 times a week for probably the first 2 or 3 weeks I was out, and then started gradually working my way back down to about once a week.
Yeah.
But they had me on like details or something like that doing it.
Sure.
But.
And so somebody stepped in, and so I want to kind of move in that direction now as we talk about, General Hawk, the 16th Air Force commander, has coined this phrase, first sergeant, and not a diamond wearer, but who is the first sergeant in your chain of command? Who is that first NCO, that touch point? For you, it was this instructor. Can you just, with your story, talk about the importance of that person and how it impacted you being here?
Right. And as you and I had kind of talked, Chief, I had been dealing with different issues for years, and had done a lot of suppression of my emotions and didn't really know how to cope with a lot of stressors in my life. And when this day arose and I was taken back to the back offices to talk to people, of course, knowing that I could go to my instructor and being able to identify the fact that I was struggling,
yeah,
and have it taken past there, he actually took me back, and I remember still, it was Sergeant Zingley,
mm-hmm,
sitting in the back offices over at Goodfellow, and took the time to sit down and really talk through everything that was going on and make sure that everything was actually okay, and helped me actually develop out my game plan for what I wanted to do to take care of my stuff. And when it came down to it, regardless of who it had been, it just comes down to knowing how to identify when somebody's actually not doing all right.
Right. Right, which can be tough.
Yeah.
You know, you kind of alluded to it just now, and something I think that's important in your story to talk about, because I think it affects a lot of our folks, and I think it's something we don't always recognize. But talk a little bit about really the genesis of some of these problems. We like to think of this, we couch this stuff as Air Force problems, right? The Air Force is dealing with mental health, and our airmen are dealing with things, but this goes back a lot further than just when you were in the Air Force. And can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely, Chief. A lot of it really started back in high school, where I kind of had a hard time making friends my own age. I got along better with my teachers than I did any of my other classmates.
Yeah.
And that kind of put me on the outside of a lot of social circles, and it carried through a lot to even my years after high school, and not really being able to make a whole lot of connections with people. And at that point I was starting to develop a lot of signs of depression, and would lock myself away in my room. And then getting into the Air Force, I had spent a year doing EOD and failed out at EOD, and it was just one thing after another that just building on itself, and just I was pretty much just convincing myself that I wasn't worth it and that nobody cared.
Yeah.
And convinced myself that there was nobody that could understand what I was going through, and came to the realization through my work with the mental health at Goodfellow was that the likelihood of me ever being the only person that was ever dealing with these issues is so low.
Yeah.
That
that's such a great point.
Yeah. And it's once I started to realize that, and started to realize that I wasn't the only one that I was dealing with a lot of this stuff, it helped me actually be okay with starting to talk about it with some of my peers.
Yeah. And you found that useful once you were
Yeah.
able to start really opening up and talking about that. You know, can you? There's going to be a lot of people watching this video across our wing. What would you? What advice would you give somebody right now as we kind of wrap this up, that is maybe dealing with some things that you've dealt with and has not been actively looking for help?
So it used to frustrate me what my mom would say, that it'll always get better, no matter how bad it gets, or it'll always get better. And looking back on it now, it's true, because even within the last month I've been dealing with some pretty heavy stuff, and I've been able to work through it, and it does always get better. And as I was mentioning earlier, Chief, it's not likely that you're the only person that's ever dealt with your specific scenario, or specifically what you're dealing with. And knowing how to talk about it and who to talk to about it, and honestly just having a conversation can literally make or break, or make a difference.
There's a lot of great stuff in there, and you talk about connections and getting that help, and we just I don't think we can talk about it enough. I want to say thank you for sharing your story. It takes a lot of courage to sit here, right, in my office, and with the camera in front of you, and telling the whole wing what Ben Murphree has been through, but how you've come out on the other side, and I just think it's hugely valuable, and so thank you for doing that.
Yeah, you got it, Chief.
And you know, as we leave you, what I would ask is, I've gone around the wing now, and you guys have all heard me talk about you know, the decision that the enemy has to make every day, right, as to whether they're going to challenge the United States of America. And the decision is continually no, and we want to keep it no because of guys like Ben here who have decided to take it upon themselves to be strong, to search for help, to use those resiliency skills to keep themselves in the battle space, right, and to just be great airmen and great people, which is what our Air Force is made of. And so I thank you all. Thanks for taking the time to watch, and I encourage you out, if you're someone out there who has a who has a similar story or a story of resiliency that you'd like to share, man, please let us know as we get out. I think there's great value in our airmen telling their stories to other airmen. Because like you said, he's not the only one going through this. You're just not. You're never the only one going through it. So thank you for everything you do. On behalf of Colonel Pearson and myself, we appreciate you all. Thank you.